see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutch, and I'm here with a couple of students from the California College of the Arts. It's Catalina Garcia, Shanna Fong, and Devin Harvath. Is that right pronunciations? So you're working on a project on empathy, and so you've been researching it, and we already did an interview. You interviewed me actually, and that's online. And now we want to do kind of like a brainstorming kind of a process, and you're there at CCA at the in a kind of a brainstorming room, I guess. So maybe you can kind of just introduce what you kind of have in mind for the next couple hours.
Sure. We've been doing some research. As we explained last time, part of our process is to first go out there and do a lot of research before you even start thinking of what sort of venture you're going to start, because this is for our social ventures class. So at the end, our goal is to come up with a new venture based on needs that we found within the market. So it's a little bit different because we're thinking about empathy in terms of a market, which when we had our first interview, we were discussing that it's a little bit sometimes challenging to look at it in that way, but it's been very helpful for us. And we've been out there talking to people in the streets and talking to experts like yourself. And we're starting to put together a research report, which will help us then take the next step towards creating a venture. So I actually had the opportunity to travel to Colombia and research and interview people there, both experts and ordinary people in the streets all over the city in Bogota, Colombia. And Shauna had the chance to go to Japan. You went to a couple.
Yeah, I went to multiple cities and observed a lot and spoke to some travelers as well.
And Devin has been here keeping us grounded at home base, and he went to the Facebook conference. I know you guys met up there and been interviewing all sorts of people as well in the streets and experts. So we've come up with all this great knowledge, and it's been swimming and brewing in our heads. And now we're in the process of synthesizing it and trying to identify patterns. And we've come up with a research report, which is on the works, that we'd love to share with you and see what you think is right, what's not. We would like for it to be an open conversation, and share it, hear your thoughts, if you agree, if you disagree, because a research report is never done. You can always continue to build upon it and improve it. We were thinking that we would divide the session in 3 sections. The first one to go over the research report. The second one, we would love to learn more about your journey and how you started with all this empathy and on this empathy path, and why and how, and then everything, all the steps along the way, how different endeavors that you've tried, different things that have worked, that have not worked. And then finally, from all of that, we'd love to end it with sort of a brainstorming session. We'll see how that goes, because it's hard when you're not in person, because there's a lot of moving around and on the board. But, we just want to exchange as much thoughts as we can through this interview or session or whatever we want to call it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a little bit of a brainstorming session. Yeah, this is great. I'm really looking forward to this, and I'm kind of excited just to see that you're kind of working on this. It's becoming a subject, in the schools that the students are taking it on, because it's part of the overall vision of building a culture of empathy and promoting empathy within society. So I've enjoyed talking to you and Devin. We're met up there at Facebook, so that was a lot of fun to kind of chat there. So yeah, just lead away. I'll just follow your lead here.
Perfect. First, we wanted to thank you for doing this with us. I mean, for being so accessible and for being so excited as well as we are to this exchange. So I don't know, Shauna, do you want to start off the presentation? Sure. Should we share your screen with you?
Let's do this. We're gonna screen share. Hopefully this works. Okay. So.
Oh, okay. I didn't even know we could do that with.
So let's try this. Okay. Can you see the first page of our report?
Yeah, it's just coming up. Yeah, I see it now. Social ventures.
Okay, great. So we're going to try and go into full screen. So we don't see Edwin anymore.
Oh, great.
Is that
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, great. All right, so we approached, we all wanted to start kind of understanding and looking at empathy, because we had this sense that, empathy is really important to humans, to our survival, to us functioning, as a global community as well as within our own, smaller networks. So we started on this journey to really understand, what it is that makes empathy, so important to us, as well as understanding what the opportunities are, that we can really help catalyze and amplify empathy in the world. So we believe that empathy matters. So here's basically what we're going to cover today, and we can just, kind of skip over this. So this research report right now contains definitions of empathy, both from the experts that we spoke to as well as just the people that we interviewed. We also created a model of empathy, and some of that's going to look very familiar to you, Edwin. And we started identifying segments as well. So when we talk about the marketplace, it's really, the market for empathy is really everyone. It was a bit challenging for us, I think, to start kind of honing in and defining segments, customer segments, but we think that we came up with something interesting. And lastly, we're going to talk about barriers and tools that we uncovered in speaking to the experts and people and the secondary research that we did. So first off, what is empathy according to the dictionary? It's the action of understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experience of another. So that's according to the dictionary. According to the experts that we spoke to, here are just some of the words that they shared with us. It's feeling for someone in need. It doesn't require an understanding. It's a visceral understanding of, another's feeling or experience. Seeing the eyes through seeing the world through the eyes of someone else. So there's some interesting kind of.
And we talked to all sorts, so maybe you can go over a couple of the people, we
interviewed psychologists, sociologists, market research experts, really all kinds of experts, as well as in religion and I forget, economics, a lot of different people in different fields. And actually, the last quote towards the bottom is interesting, and it starts to hint at the link between empathy and pro-social action, which is, behavior, someone's behavior or an action that's really towards benefiting someone else or society as a whole. So we start to kind of see some linkage between empathy, which could be considered an emotional state or maybe a soft skill, and how that leads to a motivation to actually act on someone else's, not their behalf, but some kind of action that leads to benefiting another person's welfare. Was there?
Yeah.
And feel free to jump in at any point as well, Edwin.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks.
The thing I might add here is the definition from Sam Richards, the middle on the left there. He specifically excludes moral and ethical implications, which is sort of interesting debate in the field. But anyway, I think we'll get into that a little bit more.
Okay, so next is what empathy is according to the people that we spoke with. So putting yourself in another person's shoes to feel how they're feeling. the ability for people to realize that suffering is universal. So starting to get into that sense of oneness that we spoke about on the last call. You know, understanding another person's position. Let's see. Being able to relate emotionally to someone else. So again, understanding that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of kind of similarities there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one thing I would add is that most of the people, well, I would say a lot of the people we spoke with seem to associate it mainly with negative emotions and more of a compassionate state.
So a sense of someone else's suffering.
Right, right.
Mm-hmm.
Which, yeah, so anyway, that was another interesting.
Yeah.
And we'll get more into it later on when we get to our segments, but like in Colombia, a lot of the people in the streets didn't know what empathy was. Whereas here in the States, it seemed like people in general had a good idea of what it was, and a lot of the definitions from person to person were very similar. So it wasn't such as abstract as we thought. That was one surprise, that it wasn't as we thought the concept was really abstract, but it seems like people do get it in general.
And it seems like you went to two different, you kind of went to experts, people in the field, asked them, and then you went to people kind of on the streets. You got two different points of view as well.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can go to the next. So, you know, why does it matter? In our research, we found a lot of really interesting sort of positions on empathy, you know, and talking about how crucial it is to the survival of the human race. And how, you know, as we are escalating further and further into our sort of technologically advanced society, how, you know, the goal of that connectivity is really helping humanity see that we're just one extended family, you know, again, kind of on that sense of oneness. And when there's no empathy, there's conflict, there's violence, there's aggression. Do you guys want to add anything? No?
I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what's the challenge and what are the limitations of empathy? Well, we found that, you know, self-concern often trumps empathy. So it's really hard to think about if you are really caught up in yourself and what's going on in your own world. Empathy can also be selectively elicited. So that means that, you know, it may lead to nepotism. It may lead us to react to really sort of shocking events, you know, like natural disasters. But, you know, we don't see the same kind of empathic responses to, you know, sort of long-standing conditions like hunger, poverty, diseases. And empathy can also lead to tribalism. So it's this interesting paradox of, you know, being able to empathize with the people within your own group, you know, whoever you kind of identify with, whether that's religion or race, or, you know, a multitude of different ways that people identify within groups. But that can also lead to, you know, actually less empathy towards other groups that may have opposing ideologies, or not even opposing, but, you know, just different ideologies, different kind of set of identifying factors. Those groups.
Well, I don't know how much I'm going to jump in here, but perhaps we could talk about that later, because it's not that empathy leads to for me, that it leads to tribalism, is that tribalism or fear leads to a lack of empathy. So it's kind of like hard to say that connection leads to less connection, in a sense. But anyway, it's kind of a, you know, I think that's kind of an aspect. I've seen this kind of discussion come up before. I'd love to talk about it more at a later point.
Don't you? I can see perhaps we chose the extreme, which is tribalism, but when you're talking about, you visit a lot of Republican and Democratic conventions, and it seems like they're all really want a lot of the similar things, but they're so focused on being a part of that one group that they don't empathize with the other group. That's sort of what we mean with this third challenge. It's that when you're part of the group, sometimes you stop thinking and you just follow the group instead of empathizing with the other group that's opposing or different.
Yeah, you're saying that there's in groups, that people within the groups might have empathy for each other and then not have empathy for people outside of the group,
Right.
Exactly.
right? But it's not the empathy that leads to the lack of empathy to the outside group. It's like fear and usually it's like fear or that self-concern that leads to the lack of empathy for outside groups. So it's not the empathy itself that's leading to
Okay.
that's just kind of my point because the same discussion kind of comes up. The same discussion comes up in terms of psychopaths. Is like if a person is a psychopath, they might have some empathy, but they kind of might limit it. You know, so is it the person's empathy that's actually leading to the limiting of the empathy? Do you know what I'm saying? So it's a little bit more of a subtle, and I think very important, kind of a distinction that you know.
Throughout this report, we've been like struggling, or not struggling, but throughout it, we've been really debating our use of words because it's so important. We talked about language in our last interview, and yeah, I mean, we tried to be really careful about the way like we word things. So maybe we need to pay attention to how we word this third challenge. Edwin, do you think we can describe that challenge without creating any confusion or, um,
You know, I think it's what you're starting off. It's like self-concern, and self-concern tends to be like fear. And so it's the fear that inhibits the empathy in a group level as well. So it's not the empathy that's causing the lack of empathy. It's the fear of kind of the other, and it's kind of it goes at an individual level to a group and larger groups. So when you have, Nazi Germany, they used, fear of the Jews and demonizing and so forth. So it wasn't like empathy within the group that, it was like using fear and control and all these other emotions, it seems to me. So it's like what you really want to do is expand the empathy. It's like the problem there is not enough empathy. There's a restriction of the empathy. It's like creating an outside, fear, and then you kind of inhibit the empathy from, having it to everyone.
could this third point be empathy can be restricted to groups? Like that's
Yeah, to in-groups. It's something about empathy can lead to tribalism. It's going to be that the lack of empathy leads to tribalism because it's lack of empathy for the outside group. So there can be like in-group and out-group, definitely, but it's like what's causing, that out-group, that, and it tends to be fear or kind of like domination or control. So yeah, it's what would be a good, you're wanting to say something about in-group, right? Because that's what tribal is. There's all kinds of forms of in and out group. There can be cliques in a school, like a small group, and it's like everybody outside or some kind of a religion. It's the outside people that are to be feared. And within us, we support each other and maybe have empathy to one degree or another.
so. Do you think it always leads back to fear, though? I feel like sometimes it's just you stop thinking. It's not even fear, but you just follow the masses or follow the group.
Yeah, it could be just, you get caught swept up in the emotions of something. You can't kind of help it, or so for me, that's why I call it the culture of empathy. For me, the culture is kind of a widespread empathy. It's like, how do we have empathy at all levels?
Yeah.
So, this is something I have to think about this more, how to really articulate it, kind of more that it's like, what is causing tribalism? What does cause tribalism? Is it, and in groups, is it, I don't think it's empathy. It's, there's going to be the fear or wanting to belong and, all these other, and if you're wanting to belong, it's kind of fear of being on the out group.
It's groups can limit empathy. own group or something.
Yeah, that's it. Groups can limit empathy to the outside.
I like that. Groups can limit empathy to the outside. Down. I think that's a good resolution for this. And if you think of anything else as we move forward, feel free to jump in.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
Sure. I think we have like sections.
Okay. Like 3 sections.
So our objectives for this research project were to test our series of assumptions, and they are outlined. We started kind of putting this together as we began our secondary research. So, the first is we're all born with the capacity for empathy. Empathy is a skill that can be practiced and developed. Greater empathy between individuals and groups will lead to greater understanding and cooperation. Therefore, empathy has economic value. There's an empathy deficit or greater need for empathy now than before. Therefore, new markets for empathy can be created or existing markets can function more efficiently. And you'll see, when we get into our conclusions, how these assumptions have been kind of changed and adjusted based on the research we did. The second objective we had for this project was defining and identifying the one with the most impact potential. And the third was to uncover insights into how empathy fosters shared understanding, addresses global issues, and sparks pro-social action.
Okay, great.
So research by reading as much as we could from all different kinds of sources. This is a quick summary of the kinds of secondary research topics we looked at. So we tried to tried to define related terms, academic and scientific research. Empathy markets, we tried to define markets including fiction, film, travel, news, therapy, research, design, conflict resolution, mediation. And we looked at bullying. We talked to empathy experts. We spoke with and worked. And basically tried to get an all-around, well-rounded perspective. So we spoke directly with 11 different experts. And Shauna mentioned earlier, they specialize in economics, psychology, linguistics, history, religion, conflict resolution, marketing, and empathy studies. And out on the streets, 3 different continents, we spoke with 22 people. And just here's a sampling of some of the kinds of questions we asked. So these were people who are non-experts. We had them define empathy for themselves, ask them about some of our assumptions. Do they believe it's something we're born with? And ask them to tell us their stories to really get them thinking about empathy and embodying it. So we asked them to tell us about a time they experienced empathy. How do they deal with people who are different from them? Do they seek out people who are different from them or not? How do they deal with people who disagree with them? We tried to get into social action. What actions they take, donate. Are there issues or causes they would like to take action but haven't, and why haven't they? And asked about social networks and technology, other empathy markets, books and movies, and where they think empathy can have the most impact. These are the locations of our research: San Francisco, Bogota, Colombia, and throughout Japan. Should I keep going for this part?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so a lot of this comes from you, Edwin, actually. We started with the definition, the model of empathy that you gave to us, and tried to understand it from our own perspective. Having done research on 3 different continents, we came up with, I think, and hope is a very understanding of empathy. Beginning with empathy, And a lot of this looks familiar. Edwin?
Yeah, I see that. It's not too sharp here, but I'm trying to get close enough to see it. Yeah, I see that self-empathy. There's a pre-empathy and then self-empathy. And then what are the three branches?
Branches: mirrored, imaginative, experiential, and then the fruit of the tree represents pro-social action.
Oh, that's a nice metaphor.
When we were thinking about on our last interview we had, we were thinking what that would look like, right? The model, and we talked about a circle, and then we talked about, you know, and we tried different things, so we kept on getting, okay, do you need this one to get the other one? Do you not? And that's sort of our thinking, and we came up with this tree. So we'll walk you through each one and explain why.
Oh, okay, great. I love metaphors.
So we talked about a lot of different things and settled on the tree. So pre-empathy, that's the soil in the ground. And before people can access the capacity for empathy, you must first develop self-identity and overcome basic functional, economic, and cultural barriers. So, you know, this touches on the fact that empathy is actually a relatively new and elite concept. So a lot of this came out of Lena's research in Colombia.
So,
I don't know if you want to speak
I'll
about
say
that.
a few words to that. I was surprised because, I mean, it's very easy when you get into this world to think, oh, it's obvious, you know, empathy. Everybody needs it. Everybody can do it. It's such a relevant subject. And when I went to Colombia, I found that when I talked to people in the streets, like in certain parts of the city, they didn't really know what it was. Once you explained the subject, they grasped it, but didn't find value. A lot of people didn't see value in it and sort of struggled with the concept in general. Then when I talked to the experts who work with in social actions in Colombia, throughout Colombia, with different tribes and vulnerable populations, they saw it like an elite concept. And I was shocked at first, but then, you know, once I started talking to more people and seeing the realities of people in Colombia, and especially with the most vulnerable communities, I started to see where they were coming from towards the end of the research there. And there's a general, and you'll see when we get to the segments, but there's a general need for certain conditions that need to be there before you can really start fostering empathy. And that's why I think empathy is the soil. It's soil that has the capacity to grow plants and fruit, but you need water and you need sun in order for that to start growing. So I'm just going to read one of the quotes from Colombia, one of the experts I spoke to, and it says, in order for a society to have empathy, you need certain conditions. The concept of empathy sounds a bit elitist when looked upon in the context of people's realities in developing countries. People are concerned with meeting basic needs, food, water, and shelter. So a lot of these people in the streets had a hard time thinking, like, why should I be thinking about the other? I can barely think about myself. And even in the most vulnerable communities, people don't even have a sense of self-worth. So first you need to develop that sense of self-worth and of identity, and have those basic functional rights and needs like food and shelter and water before you can start thinking about the other. So that was a huge insight for us.
Okay.
Yeah, so you're saying that in Colombia that people aren't very familiar with the terminology, the word empathy, and then that the expert there that you talked to was saying that that they found it kind of like elitist, and that you really have to focus on the underlying needs that people have, like food, water, and shelter, before you can kind of have empathy. That to kind of nurture empathy, you got to meet those basic needs.
Exactly. And I talked to several experts and a lot of people, and it all came down to that, it seemed. Because in general, even it wasn't necessarily one exclusive thing. It was not just the basic needs. It was not just the self-identity. It was like, it can be any mix of those things. But you do need those certain conditions before you can start fostering empathy. And it was surprising when I was there observing. I grew up in Colombia, so it was a little bit hard to go back there with a magnifying glass and observe the culture and realize that there's very little empathy. But a lot of it's out of the fact that there's no security, which is one of the basic rights that people should have. So we'll get more into it as we move along throughout the presentation, more in detail. But it opened up our eyes to like, okay, there are cultures or places where there is very little, and this is why.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. So next, the self-empathy, and obviously that begins with intentional self-awareness, sensory awareness, and mindfulness. So we think that that requires self-reflection and can be practiced and improved by practicing things like meditation and yoga.
So one of the things that we found here, after thinking about this model, we realized that you really need self-empathy before you can get any of the other forms of empathy. And feel free to, we'd love to hear what you think about that. But it did seem like before you can start thinking of the other, you really need to connect with yourself first. And that's where self-empathy comes in.
I just did an interview with a group that was doing. They were going for in Seattle. They would go to the households of parents with newborn babies, and they would actually go there and kind of empathize with the parents and kind of give the parents empathy, about what their concerns were. And they would actually videotape the interaction between the parents and the baby and then kind of discuss it. And the whole thing, and there's a whole kind of a literature around attachment, the importance of children, of babies, to feel themselves reflected in through the parents. So to see their movements, to see their facial movements, to see themselves reflected. So you could, if you go, that's kind of like, while the self-empathy is something, that we had talked about before, you could look back and say, well, starting at this age, there's also the need for being seen as well by others that actually assists you in your self-empathy, in connecting to yourself. So it's kind of like a different, it's like an addition, I would say, and there's a whole kind of a theory, not theory, but a whole movement around this that I'm becoming aware of just the importance of raising children in a very empathic way. And you were talking about Colombia, and I believe, families are very strong there, and, there's a lot of nurturing of, within the family and children and all that kind of stuff. So.
Well, it depends in what type of communities you're looking at, because a lot of the most vulnerable communities, and like 80% of or 90% of the population in Colombia is under poverty. So a lot of those people, the sense of family, it depends how you look at it, because the parents are working really long hours and their children are alone in their homes.
They don't get a lot of support then.
It's a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
It depends. Yeah, the families, the parents can be very loving of their children, but if they only see them an hour or so, or not even in the day, then how much is that really impacting the outcome of the child?
Yeah.
So I think what you're saying, Edwin, is sort of like the self-empathy is improved when your need to be empathized with is fulfilled.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay. So part of it is need to be empathized with, I guess. Okay, I'll move on unless anyone else has any other thoughts. The next one here is mirrored empathy. And I think we're sort of, our understanding of this is that this is also sort of a basic step in the ability to empathize. It has to do with mirror neurons. And it's the way we understand it at this point is that it's involuntary. So people mimic physical and emotional gestures through direct contact with each other. So babies crying at the same time, people yawning in sympathy, and people feeling physical pain when someone else they see is experiencing pain.
So revisit how this looks, considering what we just learned, like your comments on self-empathy. But here, what we're thinking is like once you have self-empathy, well, the conditions that come before empathy, then self-empathy, and you can branch out into the three different sections, which is mirrored, experiential, and imaginative. So there, you can go from self-empathy to either one of those. that's why we had thought about the tree.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not mutually exclusive. You know, they can be occurring at, you know, at the same time. So.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So the next branch of the tree is imaginative empathy. And the way we understand this is it's maybe a little bit of a deeper experience that requires intention. And so we define it as actively extrapolating another person's emotional state based on incomplete or indirect evidence. So you're able to sort of put yourself into someone else's shoes without directly observing everything or directly observing a full state. So you're able to imagine what it's like to be them based on some limited information. Also known as cognitive empathy or perspective taking. So reading a book, you know, or radio, or having a conversation, and then empathizing with somebody, we think are examples of that.
Yeah, the one that I always hear is there's this test that they do with children if they can do perspective taking. I don't know if you heard that test where, you know, the researcher, whoever, has like a box that says crayons on it, and then they ask the children, well, what do you think is in here? And they say, oh, there's crayons in there. Then they open it up, and then they show there's actually candles in it. And then they put it back, and then somebody else comes into the room, and like children before, well, then they say, what do you think this person who just came in the room will think is in here? And usually until children kind of have that sense of self-awareness, they'll actually think that whatever they think is what the other person will think. And then at around 18 months, there's a sense of self-awareness kind of gets developed, and they'll be able to put themselves in the perspective of the other person and say, oh, they don't know what's in here. And so that's kind of one of the components of the perspective taking. That's like a test that they always do. And there's kind of all kinds of different versions of that. So that's kind of like one part of perspective taking.
Is that it requires that self-awareness.
Yeah, it does. It seems to, if I understand it correctly, there's like a sense of, it's kind of like that sense of self-awareness that adds like another dimension to the, but yeah, I'm not, there seems to be other aspects too, but yeah, that's what I keep hearing. So that sense of self-awareness comes in.
3 branches that are coming out kind of all seem to require that self-awareness, which is why I think we modeled the self-empathy as the trunk, right? Because that's really kind of like the condition in order to be able to imagine or even mirror or experience another person's perspective, because you have to have that self-awareness first, right?
But what Edwin's saying, what we were in the slide before, is that you can mirror without that self-awareness. Is that correct, Edwin?
Well, yeah, in the sense that like the baby, right? You'd mentioned the baby cries. Like, why does the baby cry? Because it has that basic component of empathy. It feels the other babies cry. It feels they're crying inside of themselves, and it seems to initiate their crying as well. So they don't even have that perspective taking yet, but there's this kind of basic, you know, mirrored empathy component already kind of wired in to the baby, as I understand it.
I would argue there would be, I mean, I have right now, so I'm a new mom. I have a 9-month-old baby.
Congratulations.
Since the moment she was born, like they cry, it's all about them, right? They're very aware of what they're feeling, they're crying. So I would say that self-awareness exists when they're born. Maybe if we're going to look at that if we're going to look at the mirroring, I would think that they're more aware about themselves than they are of the other baby. I think they're aware of themselves first. They're feeling, and that's why they cry. And that's like their form of communication is all about them informing us, the parents, what they're feeling.
Yeah, so they're kind of expressing kind of what's going on inside of themselves. Yeah, and having an awareness of what's going on inside themselves.
Yeah, I would think babies are more in touch with themselves and even kids than most adults.
They're more connected to their inner feelings than.
1 second.
Okay.
Sorry, they're opening a door over here. Okay.
Okay, well, I don't want to get too bogged down because this, these things, these discussions can go on infinitum. So I don't want to, we can keep moving.
At least some of your thoughts on each one, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
The next one we're calling experiential empathy. So we understand that as distinct from imaginative empathy in the sense that it involves physically inhabiting a new physical space or state in order to understand the perspective of somebody else. Whereas imaginative empathy can be indirect or based on incomplete information. So, we think examples of this are traveling, social tourism, maybe exchange programs, things like that, where you're physically in a new environment.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay. So those are the 3 branches?
Those are the 3 branches, and then empathic action we sort of understand to be the fruit of the tree in the sense that it doesn't come from necessarily one of the branches.
Or the trunk.
Or the trunk, but that it's sort of all and throughout the process.
Uh-huh.
Including the fact that, empathy or perspective taking is an action in itself. So empathic action we define as voluntary behavior that sometimes, but not necessarily, results from a prior state of empathy, consisting of actions intended to benefit others or society as a whole. It's pro-social action. So donating, volunteering, social entrepreneurship.
Yeah, the one term that I think kind of fits in here is the common humanity. That it's like acting out of a sense, when we connect with others, we see, the other person's humanity and ourselves almost as kind of like one. And there can be like an action that kind of comes out of that sense of connection. And anyway, the term common humanity I think is kind of like central to that aspect of where the action kind of comes out of.
Okay, that's a good term. Yeah. So another major finding that we just wanted to summarize here is that that we do believe there is, based on our research, that there is now a greater need for empathy, more so than in the past, given all the new ways that we have to connect with each other, and we're interacting with each other in trade and globalization. So we have a quote here. I don't know how humanity survives without empathy towards everybody that we are connected to. So if we're connected to everybody on the planet, that's a big problem.
Mm-hmm. Who is that by? I can't read the...
That's by Steve Diller, who's actually happens to be our professor for this.
Oh, that's great.
He's a marketing expert. So we understand that to actually, in a sense, an empathy expert.
Uh-huh.
And then,
so moving on to our segments. So based on our findings, we created 3 personas to represent the segments. The first being the roadblocked. In this case, we were calling him Hugo, a police officer in Bogota. He struggles with identity issues and meeting basic needs. Then we have the capable, which we've called Samantha, who's a small business owner in San Francisco, and she has the capacity for empathy, but she's often caught up with own concerns. And then the considerate, which is Nindi, a nurse in Kyoto, Japan, who considers multiple viewpoints and acts to benefit others.
Okay.
So the roadblocked, like we mentioned before, they lack basic requirements and certain conditions to have empathy, which doesn't mean that they're not capable. It's just that they need certain conditions in order to start nurturing it. And the needs that we feel that this segment has is a need for security, for validation, and just the basic functional things that most people have, which food, shelter, and water, things like that. And at the very bottom, we have a little diagram of sort of their thinking process, and the self and other are separated.
One concept that I find very helpful is to think of empathy as like the dimmer switch, that there's degrees of it. And it's like it's very rarely totally off, but it's kind of like how do we kind of brighten it? So just is another kind of a.
That's a great metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's a good thing to think about. Maybe also as to how segments. So this is the capable. So she's aware of empathy and the potential impact. She's often finds empathy. She still often finds empathy inaccessible. She uses Facebook and other social media, but feels it's inadequate to get past like superficial interactions. And here are a few quotes from her, and these quotes are pulled from our actual research. And she says, "I think there's a greater hope for empathy. This will sound very hippie-ish, but I think that with more empathy, there would be more peace. At work, I'm caught up at the moment, and I don't empathize with people. So the idea of self-concern trumping empathy. And then social media shouldn't replace face-to-face interactions. It should complement it. The problem occurs when it does replace it." So her needs are oneness, connection and community, and harmony, which means sort of like balance, right? Mm-hmm. And here we see the self and other starting to merge together.
Did you mention the values of the first person? It's
the needs?
Oh, you're using word needs. Okay. What was the need of the first one again?
Security, a sense of.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see. There it is. Security.
Validation, mm-hmm. And functional needs like food, shelter, water, etc.
Oh, okay. Great. Thanks.
So yeah, okay. Moving forward. Sorry. And then the considerate Nindi, a nurse in Kyoto, Japan, she actively seeks out new viewpoints without fear of psychological cost. I have a little quote here that says, "I wanted to know what is life outside this sheltered circle. It was a search for knowledge as well as a way to give back. I forced myself to take a view that I will consume a wide range of inputs." Nindi regularly makes decisions while considering as many viewpoints as possible, and she thinks the more perspective she takes, the more she'll grow. And her needs are truth, justice, and a sense of duty. See now that the self and the other are coming together, creating oneness.
Yeah, so this is a little bit like your chart is a little bit like that empathy dial then, right? Kind of low, medium, and high.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So what do we want to do here? I want to go over these.
I don't think we have to go over them in detail.
Yeah.
So go.
Okay. All right. So, well, along the way, we've been careful to sort of try to understand and put into words the barriers that we see and also the tools that we see in order to improve access to empathy. So I'll just run through them all, but they're perceived threats. There's self-concern. There's biological and physical realities that block empathy. Inability to identify with groups, distrusting differences, lack of self-empathy. And then tools include what we're calling Uber tools, sort of things that encompass a lot of things like technology, as well as other categories like experiences, the art of consideration, building connections, and making meaning out of knowledge. So I think later on this afternoon, we'd like to get your thoughts more specifically on some of these and the connections between them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. So basically, where we're at is we made some adjustments to our assumptions that you saw back in our objectives slide. So I'll just run through those real quick. Most of us are born with the capacity for empathy, but it must be nurtured and practiced. Barriers can lower our ability to empathize, and tools can serve to heighten it. Greater empathy will lead to less conflict and more collaboration. Empathy has value. There is a growing need for empathy based on recent and rapidly expanding opportunities to connect offered by globalization and online social media. There is enormous potential to tap into proven empathy boosters, connecting connect in more meaningful ways, and flourish as a global community. So we've kind of honed in as the capable market segment. That was the second one, as having the highest potential. And we really want to kind of use the barriers and tools that we uncovered in our research to really understand how to activate and amplify empathy. And hopefully, you know, that will lead to sparking pro-social action. But one important distinction that I think that we came out with as a result of our research, you know, we started going into it thinking, well, yeah, you know, we really need a way to find how to, we're interested in the actions that come out of empathy, you know, as a result of empathy, because we're making an assumption that those actions will be good and we just need more of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But through our journey, we've realized that we can't really assign an agenda to empathy, that it's enough for us to really focus on sparking more empathy, because we believe that will in turn, you know, lead to better actions. But we ourselves are not in a position to judge what good actions are. We can just hope to encourage more of them. So basically that takes us to our next steps, which is focusing our business plan, our social venture on segment, exploring ways to make tools actionable by creating transformative experiences that lower the risks of empathy and build personal bridges. So dealing with some of those barriers to empathy that we uncovered. And like I said, not assigning any specific agenda to empathy. I believe that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Oh yeah, then this is just appendix. So yeah,
Okay.
that's pretty much it.
Okay, yeah, great. I like that. Enjoyed that last segment. So you're kind of looking at the people who are kind of in the medium range of on the empathy dial, and how you can kind of contribute to their creating an environment, I guess, where they can have more experience more empathy. Or it's like you don't want to tell them what the action is, the empathic action, but create an environment for them to come up with the action themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we sort of are concerned that by prejudging what the action should be, we're actually limiting the effect or the impact of their empathy.
Yeah. So it's more about creating the kind of container in the environment for them to have an empathic connection, and then they can build the actions out of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we really think. Is that something you?
Yeah, I think that really to me that really resonates. It reminds me of a lot with the conflict resolution models. Is, you know, it's not up to the mediator to tell people what to do, but they create the container for the empathic connection to happen, and then people use their own creativity and all the resources from where they're coming from to work together to create some kind of an action together.
Good.
Awesome.
Cool.
So did anything in particular stand out? Have a difference to any one of our sections or disagreements?
Yeah, well, I kind of did try to bring them up as we kind of went along, you know, with the, you know, like the tribe, this whole notion, I've seen that kind of come up before about that empathy is the cause for, you know, not having empathy, which, you know, there's a lot to that. I mean, some people would say, you know, psychopaths use empathy to get their, you know, what it is that they want, but it's not really a full empathy. It's like, you know, kind of making that distinction. It's really kind of the selfishness or greed or fear or whatever that's causing the negative action. And so that was kind of the one point. And, you know, you had the model of the tree. I think the third branch, I wasn't quite clear on that part, but I enjoy metaphor, because the metaphor gives you something to kind of work with, and you could actually extend it. Is that the fruit drops and nurtures the ground for more empathy, right? It's kind of thinking of a whole ecology of empathy, so you can kind of play with that metaphor too. It's kind of fun.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Fruit drops and nurtures it, and it does. So
yeah, it's a metaphor of nature. Yeah, and then so just kind of starting to create a map and all that, I think is a great. It just kind of gives you something to start branching off on and thinking about. So yeah, it looks like you did a lot of really wonderful work there, research and thinking and so forth.
Great.
well, it's great to hear your input and your thoughts on this. I mean, we really respect you in the field of empathy. So seeing, hearing your thoughts on it and these are very important comments that we'll definitely take into account and continue to refine our research report. So thank you for that.
Sure.
So should we move on to the second section of our agenda?
Okay.
Yeah, we'd love to learn more about your journey, how you started on empathy, what's worked for you, what hasn't. Yeah, just tell us a little bit about your story.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world. See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Sure.
So should we move on to the second section of our agenda?
Okay.
Yeah, we'd love to learn more about your journey, how you started on empathy, what's worked for you, what hasn't. Yeah, just tell us a little bit about your story.
I think we kind of covered that in that initial interview. I can't remember quite what we did cover, but so it's kind of like you're wondering, like, how did I kind of get interested in empathy in general, and kind of how is it kind of developed? Is that the
exactly
idea?
You told us that you tried a lot of things, but we didn't get into them.
Okay. Well, I think it kind of stemmed, when I was, kind of growing up, I was kind of maybe influenced by the '60s, because I was kind of in high school in the early '70s, and I wanted to learn by doing. So I kind of got out of high school in 3 years, graduated, and then started traveling around the world. So it was kind of like a real seeker, the watching movie, travel, reading travel books, and Siddhartha and all that kind of stuff. So just spent 10 years kind of traveling and seeking, just trying to understand, kind of grow personally by doing. And so I was kind of had like a seeking, looking for kind of what was, really important in life. And I started off as a evangelical Christian, so, rather conservative. And as I kind of traveled with and kind of connected all these people around the world, I kind of slowly lost all my religiosity and really started seeing the importance of relating to people kind of at a values level. So just, seeing the humanity of people, the, kindness, the generosity, creativity. And so became interested in values in general. And also traveled, met someone that we traveled with a lot, and he was a seeker as well. And he would always take one value and just really focus on it and go in depth. And for like 6 months, he'd be talking nothing except that value, be justice or peace or love or whatever. So I thought, hey, that's a really good methodology, take one value in life, kind of zoom in on it, and just talk to everybody. It's kind of like what you're doing. You just talk to everybody about it, get their feedback on it, have dialogues about it. And so I did some of that, and that became kind of like a way of kind of exploring learning. And then got into the computer field when I stopped traveling. And I did go to college and went to like 6 different universities to get my bachelor degree in United States, Germany, and Indonesia. So it was like, that was just from my bachelor's degree. So just, always trying different things. Then kind of got into the computer field and, worked at that for, a while, and kind of wanted to do more with the humanities. And so I started, kind of got out of that, out of the computer field, had a background, with Microsoft back office, and so it was kind of mid-80s. Got into computers, and then later on did more traveling. I don't know, so I'm kind of going around and around here, but it was so anyway, I kind of wanted to do more with human values, so I started doing some documentary projects exploring what trust is, what inspiration is, and have a lot of those videos online. And then, when George Bush was in office, there was a lot of talk about conservative values, and I'd kind of seen myself as more of a progressive. And so I said, well, what are progressive values? So I did, a couple hundred interviews, interviewing people about their values, and they'd tell me things like caring and justice or peace or nonviolence or responsibility. But I found that when people talked about caring, and I said, tell me a story about caring, I mean, it's like they would start tearing up, telling these stories. Like there was one story, a guy said, he was Hispanic, and he was saying how his father during the Depression worked on the railroads in a town, in the Southwest. And, there'd be hobos and so forth, and they'd fall off the trains and they'd get killed because, just hopping trains. And he said his father would take him to the grave, where the person is being buried, like virtually an unmarked grave, nobody's there. And he said, somebody has to be here, people can't just die by themselves. There should be somebody there. And for him, that was like learning a lesson about caring. And he just would tear up about it. So I saw the importance of caring in people's lives, and then it kind of led me more and more to the importance of empathy as the underlying value of caring. It's like, why do we care? It's because, I kind of am in your shoes. I feel who you are. I feel, your humanity. And then also read some of the work of George Lakoff, who was saying progressive values are based on empathy. And then Barack Obama also ran on saying the country has an empathy deficit. So I started focusing on empathy and, started doing interviews. And kind of the more and more I got into it, the more I saw that this was really what I'd been kind of like searching for in terms of connecting, with other people and the importance of it. And that this was really kind of like this core value of how we connect with others. So, I've kind of gotten into it more and more, and then learning all the different processes for empathy, the reflective listening, empathic listening, how do you do mindfulness, the stories people have, how do you listen to the stories, and so just been getting more and more into it and really seeing how it is the thing that is really for problem solving, for conflict. It's really the way to resolve conflicts. It's like, and then I took conflict resolution, training, and it's all how when people are at loggerheads, how you dissolve that and get people to connect together. So it's almost like a magical thing, as well as relationships. The best relationships is when you're with someone that you really empathize with and empathizes with you, and you kind of have a deep connection with them. And for me, I see it as the first steps towards caring and love. So just kind of going on, deeper and deeper into it, I just thought, well, actually, all of society needs more empathy. So initially, I just wanted to make a documentary about it, but then I see we really need to get a whole cause. So it's like, how do we do that? And so really, I've just been kind of studying it, learning about it, kind of academically as well as experientially, using a lot of different type of workshop processes and so forth, nonviolent communication, compassionate listening, mediation, and so that's kind of where I am. So it's like, now how do I go about creating more empathy? And it's I think one other thing that I want to say is how it really impacted me personally is, I grew up in the 60s, so it's kind of like that generation gap between, families, and, I started, and we would fight all the time about, the conservative versus progressive viewpoints. And I really, now, with my family, I don't really argue with them. I just try to empathize, really hear what is it that's, going on for them. What are their deeper feelings and deeper needs? So it's really starting to change. I can see how it's actually, for myself personally, changing my way of relating to people. And it's so much more fulfilling way of being, is to kind of ground myself in empathy and try to nurture that. And so, I guess that's kind of like so it kind of brings me to the point, where I am now, is, how to build a movement around it. And I still see myself as a real learner. I kind of have that seeking. How do I grow more deeply and being more empathic? How do I understand it? How can we transform society? And so I always ask people now, the question is, how do we build a culture of empathy? So I'm starting to put together a kind of a blueprint for that. So I'm kind of like in the middle of it, and it's still not quite, shaped yet, but it's starting to take form. So.
That when you have it together.
Yeah, I have a web page for it, Blueprint. So I'm just starting to put lists there. It's on the website, so you can always check it out there.
Blueprint.
It's cultureofempathy.com, and then on the sidebar is Blueprint. It's like, let's see, it's how to build empathy, how to build empathy. And then it says there how to build a culture of empathy, and so it's things like, create a vision. We need a vision of what does a culture of empathy look like. And then it's the intention. Why do people even want to be empathic? Why do people even want to nurture and foster that? And so there's a bunch of other points there, like, how do we build a culture of empathy? Is, I see one way is dialoguing about it. Just talk about it, ask people about it, keep bringing it up. And that's kind of what I'm doing with the Facebook page. I keep creating a dialogue there, create different causes around it, do interviews. And I'm seeing kind of the conference, doing this online conference is one way of kind of stimulating dialogue. So, I'm still looking for ideas too. It's so what I really like about what you're talking about is the aspect of with your project is creating the container, because you can't, it's like, how do you create a structure that people can come together, connect, and then create that, use their creativity. And so the whole approach you're kind of doing, the design school, some of it I think you're using approach of kind of a methodology of bringing people together and having them tap into their creativity. That's something I'd also like to really, explore more as well. So that's kind of like the short of it for now. I don't know if you have any questions about that or comments.
Well, it's interesting, the idea of building a culture of empathy. The one insight that I would take from what we found is that you really have to speak differently to the different segments that we've identified. Like, because I experienced it firsthand when I was in Colombia. Like, I could not use the questionnaires that we had created to start off of here as a group there. I had to speak about it in a very different way, using very different language. And I mean, those three segments are pretty marked, we found, and they require different language and different approaches and different. We're gonna have to move a little bit.
Yeah, we have to plug in the battery.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in our interviews, a lot of people seem to say, and even Ashoka mentions it in their findings, they know it's not it's everyone, that every group is distinct, every culture is distinct. But in general, we found that those three major groups really they're broad enough so that if you have the language to speak to those, then it'll be easier. You'll be more successful in spreading that culture of empathy.
Yeah, so you're wanting to have a vocabulary of how to speak with those different communities.
Yeah.
In terms of how, I mean, there's kind of different aspects. One is you can talk about empathy and kind of have, these different models of empathy. And the other is to just empathize with people too. You know what I mean? It's just to kind of reflect. Really hear deeply what their concerns are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think some of the tools are, in fact, the tools I think apply from segment to segment, are pretty universal, but it's the way you use them, the way you introduce them, the way you talk about them, and the container that you put it all in, I think does have to be different for each segment. Well, I mean, at least that's what we found in our research.
Mm-hmm. Do you have like a example of that? I'm having a little trouble understanding. I know you're saying you have to kind of speak differently to the different people, but how would that look?
Well, let's say if I were gonna, maybe in terms of, because I was thinking about your work in the sustainability world, like when you were trying to sell the green homes to people. Right. It really had to come like you're saving money versus you're saving the homes.
I mean, if you're dealing with a culture that maybe faces a lot of sort of self-identity issues, or there's a lot of kind of risk factors or fear, and that's kind of their main barrier in empathizing with, another culture that holds different ideologies than them. Then the number one need is most likely to address those barriers in eliminating the risk factors, eliminating the fear factors. And that's how you're going to, more successfully facilitate building an empathy bridge between those two cultures. So if the number one need is, eliminating the fear, then we have to create an environment that is safe.
And how do you eliminate the fear?
Well, we're still figuring that out, I think.
But it's key to identify what the needs are, so that you can, because for each particular segment, because it will be more likely that you'll get through if you're creating the conditions or the environment that group needs.
Yeah. I think some of the tools that we had identified in helping people connect with that actually specifically have to do with, you know, eliminating the fear is, where's that part of it? Oh, yeah. So, yeah, having a disinterested third party as a mediator. So there's no, you know, risk of corruption. There's no risk of sort of biases if you're dealing with two different groups.
So, for example, in restorative justice, that mediation is really important. In conflict resolution, you see it as well. It's very important. We've also seen, for example, technologies to be also a third party that, or a tool or a channel actually that eliminates that fear factor. So you'll be more likely perhaps to talk to someone who's very different from you if you don't feel physically threatened, if it's online perhaps. So all those are good things to keep in mind when you are trying to foster a culture of empathy.
Right.
Well, one thing in terms of fear, something I've seen is when I went to the Republican state convention here when it was here in San Jose, and I went there and I said, "Hey, I'm here to interview you about empathy. I just want to find out what your views are about empathy." And they said, "Great, we're so happy you're here because you always get our bum rap, that we're always seen as being heartless." So they were very gracious there. They gave me a press pass, you know, introduced me to people, you know, took me around the convention. They introduced me to people. And there was a couple of young Republicans there that I said, "Well, tell me, what are your values?" Which is, I would say, is another word for needs as well. It's like, you know, what's important to you? And the one guy said, you know, protection, you know, if we're, you know, we're going to protect ourselves. So it's like, how do you deal with a situation like that, where it's like protection, you know, we're afraid something might happen, you know, we're going to protect ourselves. And what I found is I just would listen. I would say, I would do that mirrored empathy and say, so protection is really important to you. And, you know, just mirroring back what I'm hearing. And he said, that's right, you know, we're going to defend ourselves. So, you know, protection is really important, and you're wanting a sense of security. He says, yeah, we want security. We're going to protect ourselves. And anybody come into my house, you know, he didn't say it, but kind of implying I got my guns or whatever, you know. And so I said, and so I just reflected, just listened for the deeper feelings and underlying values of what was important to, and it was a sense of security. And I can really resonate with it. I want to feel secure too. But what I did in that conversation was to find the fear, and, you know, we're kind of tapping into the fear of somebody breaking into this, you know, his house, and he wants to protect himself. And then so I said, so what you're concerned about is that there's people out there who aren't empathizing with you, and that would break into your house and cause you harm. Because your friends empathize with you, they're not going to do that because they know how you feel. So you're concerned that there's people out there who don't have empathy for you. And he says, yeah, I guess so. You know? And it was like, yeah, so, and he says, yeah, I guess empathy is important. You know, it's really, you know, important thing to have empathy in the world. I said, yeah, so what can we do to create more empathy? You know, how can we work together to create more empathy? And then there was three of these young Republicans there, and then the other one, he had this, let me demonstrate it here. He had a smartphone, and he said, I got to show you something. And he brought up, he says, a friend of mine, he's like this total, he's this total self-centered jerk, you know, just thinking about himself. And then his mother was dying of cancer. She'd gotten a, you know, and one of the last things she did is he wrote him a letter, and I happen to have it on my phone. And he said, I'd like to read it to you. And I said, okay, sure. And he brought it up, and he started reading it. It was just a short letter, and it went like, son, it's so important that you care about other people, that you'll see as, as you get older and, when you die, that's really the most important thing in life, is that you have that connection and caring with other people. And, he kind of went through the whole letter, and he says, this changed my friend's life. It's like his mother died, and it was, he's just turned around, and maybe like what you're saying about, being more socially engaged and caring. And so what I wanted to just say about that is the narrative of how that story went. A lot of people, somebody says, we got to protect ourselves, we need our guns or whatever. They'll say, no, you don't need it. They go in, they deny what the person's experience is. You're talking about the police officer, whoever it was, their security person, that needs that sense of protection. And if you go and say, no, you don't need protection, they're going to get on guard and not trust you. But if you just try to hear what the deeper feelings and needs and values of the people are, and really resonate with them, really feel them, so that those feelings become, your own feeling as well. So you just kind of become one in kind of an understanding. And then it's like, then the question is, how do we work together to create a culture of empathy? Because your fears, the majority of fears to me seem to really stem out of a lack of empathy. The in-group is like fear of the other, because the other doesn't have empathy for us. So we have to shut off our empathy for them. At least that's how I kind of see it. So it's like, how do we acknowledge everyone's fear and make the connection of their fear to it being a lack of empathy? And how do we actually work together to create more empathy together? So that's kind of like a, kind of one aspect that that I've kind of come to see that's important.
I love the example of the letter. One of the things that we've identified is that those life-changing experiences, those moments, expedite the whole process of spreading a culture of empathy. So I don't know, maybe it's an area of opportunity to design these types of experiences or create opportunities for them. One of them, and the one that I've heard on your life journey, is travel. Travel hasn't been designed or put out there necessarily with that in mind, with the idea of empathy behind it. But what if it was? What if design a venture that used travel to spread empathy? Or they created, there's workshops and retreats that you've also mentioned before that change people's lives. The way that they do things after it. It could be a 3-day retreat, a 1-week retreat, and all of a sudden, like a 5-minute letter, it sort of expedites the whole process. It creates this shift of mindset. So maybe that's an area of opportunity in order to help speed up the process or push it along, the process of spreading culture of empathy.
Yeah, it's that moment, the transformation, where people really connect with each other, and then something new kind of comes out of that. And how are you creating that? How are you fostering that transformation? And it sounds like, like travel is a big one, right? It's like you get out there and you meet other people, and it's like your notions of how things are kind of changes, because you're kind of interacting and seeing the humanity of people all around the world.
So that's why we created that third branch that's called experiential empathy. Because those experiences, you're not just imagining it or mirroring it, you're living it. They have the potential to create those life-changing experiences that can shift you into that mindset of empathy.
Yeah. So it's really putting kind of physically, kind of doing something. Like there's something called the empathy belly, I think it is. You put on this, men can put on this empathy suit. I mean, I don't know if you've seen that, but so you actually can feel what it's like to be a woman and pregnant, right? Carrying the weight and what it does to your body. And there's also these suits of for old age, right? It's like they give you fogged glasses and do all kinds of stuff that really makes you feel what it's like to be old. So that's kind of the experiential, where you're actually feeling it viscerally, or living in a slum, or spending some time in a slum. So maybe that's like the experiential part of traveling.
One of your interviews, I forget who you were interviewing, but he talked about the extreme sport of empathy, of experiential empathy. And he mentions the industrial designer that put on that old suit to design better for old people. And he called, I don't remember his name, but the man that...
Roman Krznaric is, I think, probably who you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly, that interview. So he talks about looking at it as being more adventurous about your empathy endeavors. And so that whole language I really liked and got inspired by. Thinking of it as an extreme sport or as an adventure.
Yeah, I just saw something from Maya Salovitz. I interviewed her, and she was just saying, we have to make empathy sexy. You know? It's like, there's a lot of this, I think, with especially in the compassion field, right? It's like, oh, compassion for people suffering. You get kind of tired of the suffering part. There's also, empathy kind of doubles your fun.
Yeah.
Right? It doubles your creativity, it doubles the joy, it doubles the enthusiasm. So it's kind of like focusing on that part as well.
Having that discussion, one of the ways that we were thinking about it is to think about the term cosmopolitanism as a reflection of empathy.
Yeah.
That's a way to make empathy look or feel more sexy, I guess, instead of soft and fluffy.
Because the term actually refers to, being a citizen of like a common humanity, which, has a lot in common with empathy. But when you hear of the term cosmopolitan, it has much different connotations than empathy. So like I think I'd said before, a lot of people related the term empathy to suffering and, kind of bad feelings or feeling for someone in need. But it doesn't have to be like that, So, what if we could encourage a shift in language from empathy towards cosmopolitanism, which does have that kind of sexier, kind of, modern sort of feel to the language. But it does share a lot of similarities in terms of values and understanding.
I heard Barack Obama give a talk, I think it was at Notre Dame, and he said, be the crossroads. He was talking about empathy, and then he said about being the crossroads. So I think it's kind of like what you're trying to get at with the cosmopolitan, is the crossroad is where all the roads cross, so you meet people from all sides. And I think it's that kind of that openness, which, I mean, it's kind of cosmopolitan right here, right? I mean, are you from Japan?
No.
Oh, you're just... So, but see, you're from, I don't know. So anyway, there's just this cosmopolitan of just coming from a lot of different cultures. And I mean, you just went to Japan, I guess, but Shanna.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we have some great notes here from our conversation so far. I don't know, I'm struggling a little bit as to how to move forward with sort of more of a brainstorming session, given we're at a distance. I don't know, do you have any ideas, Edwin, how we can...
Not really. You're wanting to kind of put ideas up on the wall, right?
Yeah, maybe one good thing, since we were talking about travel and experiential empathy, one good thing that we could do now is try to map out the empathy market. You've talked to so many people, you know a lot of the activity that's going on. One of the exercises that we do, that we've learned to do, is to map out the market and see where there's areas for opportunity. So what's saturated, what's not. So for example, there's a lot of work going on in conflict resolution. Some work going on in dialogue, dialoguing. Maybe not so much done in the experiential part. So maybe, do you want to go with us through that exercise of mapping out?
Sure. So the markets, what are the markets? So you start with that.
Sure.
Is there something we should pull up, like the other computer maybe?
Yeah, I'll look for that.
I don't have my computer.
Sorry, Edwin, this might be a minute
Yeah.
delay here.
Sure, no problem.
Just set up.
See the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.